Section 2 of Youth by Leo Tolstoy, translated by C.J. Hogarth. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Section 2, Chapters 5 through 8. Chapter 5. My Rules. I took some sheets of paper and tried first of all to make a list of my tasks and duties for the coming year. The paper needed ruling, but as I could not find the ruler, I had to use a Latin dictionary instead. The result was that, when I had drawn the pen along the edge of the dictionary and removed the letter, I found that in place of a line I had only made an oblong smudge on the paper, since the dictionary was not long enough to reach across it, and the pen had slipped round the soft, yielding corner of the book. Thereupon I took another piece of paper, and by carefully manipulating the dictionary contrived to rule what at least resembled lines, dividing my duties into three sections: my duties to myself, my duties to my neighbor, and my duties to God. I started to indite a list of the first of those sections, but they seemed to me so numerous, and therefore requiring to be divided into so many species and subdivisions, that I thought I had better first of all write down the heading of Rules of my Life before proceeding to their detailed description. Accordingly, I proceeded to write Rules of my Life on the outside of the 6 sheets of paper which I had made into a sort of folio, but the words came out in such a crooked and uneven scrawl that for long I sat debating the question, shall I write them again? For long sat in agonized contemplation of the ragged handwriting and disfigured title-page. Why was it that all the beauty and clarity which my soul then contained came out so misshapenly on paper, as in life itself, just when I was wishing to apply those qualities to what I was thinking at the moment? "The priest is here, so please come downstairs and hear his directions," said Nicola as he entered. Hurriedly concealing my folio under the tablecloth, I looked at myself in the mirror, combed my hair upwards (I imagined this to give me a pensive air), and descended to the divannaia (room with divans or anteroom), where the table stood covered with a cloth and had an ikon and candles placed upon it. Papa entered just as I did, but by another door, whereupon the priest, a grey-headed old monk with a severe elderly face, blessed him, and Papa kissed his small, squat, wizened hand. I did the same. "Go and call Waldemar," said Papa. "Where is he? Wait a minute, though. Perhaps he is preparing for the communion at the University?" "No, he is with the Prince," said Katenka, and glanced at Lubotshka. Suddenly the latter blushed for some reason or another, and then frowned. Finally, pretending that she was not well, she left the room, and I followed her. In the drawing-room she halted and began to pencil something fresh on her paper of peccadilloes. "Well, what new sin have you gone and committed?" I asked. "Nothing," she replied with another blush. All at once we heard Dimitri's voice raised in the hall as he took his leave of Woloda. "It seems to me you are always experiencing some new temptation," said Katenka, who had entered the room behind us, and now stood looking at Lubotshka. What was the matter with my sister I could not conceive, but she was now so agitated that the tears were starting from her eyes. Finally her confusion grew uncontrollable, and vented itself in rage against both herself and Katenka, who appeared to be teasing her. "Any one can see that you are a foreigner," she cried. Nothing offended Katenka so much as to be called by that term, which is why Lubotshka used it. "Just because I have the secret of which you know," she went on, with anger ringing through her tone, "you purposely go and upset me. Please do understand that it is no joking matter." "Do you know what she has gone and written on her paper, Nicolinka?" cried Katenka, much infuriated by the term foreigner. "She has written down that—" "Oh, I never could have believed that you could be so cruel!" exclaimed Lubotshka, now bursting into open sobbing as she moved away from us. "You chose that moment on purpose. You spend your whole time in trying to make me sin. I'll never go to you again for sympathy and advice." Chapter 6. Confession. With these and other disjointed impressions in my mind, I returned to the divannaia. As soon as every one had reassembled, the priest rose and prepared to read the prayer before confession. The instant that the silence was broken by the stern, expressive voice of the monk as he recited the prayer, and more especially when he addressed to us the words, "Reveal thou all thy sins without shame, concealment, or extenuation, and let thy soul be cleansed before God. For if thou concealest aught, then great will be thy sin." The same sensation of reverent awe came over me as I had felt during the morning. I even took a certain pleasure in recognizing this condition of mine, and strove to preserve it, not only by restraining all other thoughts from entering my brain, but also by consciously exerting myself to feel no other sensation than this same one of reverence. Papa was the first to go to confession. He remained a long, long time in the room which had belonged to our grandmother, and during that time the rest of us kept silence in the divannaia, or whispered to one another on the subject of who should precede whom. At length the voice of the priest again reading the prayer sounded from the doorway, and then Papa's footsteps. The door creaked as he came out, coughing and holding one shoulder higher than the other, in his usual way, and for the moment he did not look at any of us. "You go now, Luba," he said presently, as he gave her cheek a mischievous pinch. "Mind you tell him everything. You are my greatest sinner, you know." Lubotshka went red and pale by turns, took her memorandum paper out of her apron, replaced it, and finally moved away towards the doorway, with her head sunk between her shoulders, as though she expected to receive a blow upon it from above. She was not gone long, and when she returned her shoulders were shaking with sobs. At length, next after the excellent Katenka, who came out of the doorway with a smile on her face, my turn arrived. I entered the dimly lighted room with the same vague feeling of awe, the same conscious eagerness to arouse that feeling more and more in my soul that had possessed me up to the present moment. The priest, standing in front of a reading-desk, slowly turned his face to me. I was not more than 5 minutes in the room, but came out from it happy, and so I persuaded myself, entirely cleansed, a new, a morally reborn individual. Despite the fact that the old surroundings of my life now struck me as unfamiliar, even though the rooms, the furniture, and my own figure— would to heavens that I could have changed my outer man for the better in the same way that I believed myself to have changed my inner I— were the same as before, I remained in that comfortable attitude of mine until the very moment of bedtime. Yet no sooner had I begun to grow drowsy with the conning over of my sins than in a flash I recollected a particularly shameful sin which I had suppressed at confession time. Instantly the words of the prayer before confession came back to my memory and began sounding in my ears. My peace was gone for ever. "For if thou concealest aught, then great will be thy sin." Each time that the phrase recurred to me I saw myself a sinner for whom no punishment was adequate. Long did I toss from side to side as I considered my position, while expecting every moment to be visited with the divine wrath, to be struck with sudden death perhaps, an insupportable thought. Then suddenly the reassuring thought occurred to me: why should I not drive out to the monastery when the morning comes, and see the priest again, and make a second confession? Thereafter I grew calmer. Chapter 7. The Expedition to the Monastery. Several times that night I woke in terror at the thought that I might be oversleeping myself, and by 6 o'clock was out of bed, although the dawn was hardly peeping in at the window. I put on my clothes and boots, all of which were lying tumbled and unbrushed beside the bed, since Nicola, of course, had not been in yet to tidy them up, and without a prayer said or my face washed, emerged, for the first time in my life, into the street alone. Over the way, behind the green roof of a large building, the dim, cold dawn was beginning to blush red. The keen frost of the spring morning, which had stiffened the pools and mud and made them crackle under my feet, now nipped my face and hands also. Not a cab was to be seen, though I had counted upon one to make the journey out and home the quicker. Only a file of wagons was rumbling along the Arbet Prospect, and a couple of bricklayers talking noisily together as they strode along the pavement. However, after walking a verst or so, I began to meet men and women taking baskets to market or going with empty barrels to fetch the day's water supply, until at length, at the cross-streets near the Arbot gate, where a pieman had set up his stall and a baker was just opening his shop, I espied an old cabman, shaking himself after indulging in a nap on the box of his bescratched old blue-painted hobble-de-hoy wreck of a drozhki. He seemed barely awake as he asked 20 kopecks as the fare to the monastery and back, but came to himself a moment afterwards, just as I was about to get in, and, touching up his horse with the spare end of the reins, started to drive off and leave me. "My horse wants feeding," he growled. "I can't take you, barin, sir." With some difficulty, and a promise of 40 kopecks, I persuaded him to stop. He eyed me narrowly as he pulled up, but nevertheless said, "Very well, get in, barin." I must confess that I had some qualms lest he should drive me to a quiet corner somewhere, and then rob me, but I caught hold of the collar of his ragged driving coat, close to where his wrinkled neck showed sadly lean above his hunched-up back, and climbed on to the blue-painted, curved, rickety seat. As we set off along Vozdvizhenka Street, I noticed that the back of the drozhki was covered with a strip of the same greenish material as that of which his coat was made. For some reason or another this reassured me, and I no longer felt nervous of being taken to a quiet spot and robbed. The sun had risen to a good height, and was gilding the cupolas of the churches when we arrived at the monastery. In the shade the frost had not yet given, but in the open roadway muddy rivulets of water were coursing along, and it was through fast-thawing mire that the horse went clip-clopping his way. Alighting, and entering the monastery grounds, I inquired of the first monk whom I met where I could find the priest whom I was seeking. "His cell is over there," replied the monk as he stopped a moment and pointed towards a little building up to which a flight of steps led. "I respectfully thank you," I said, and then fell to wondering what all the monks, who at that moment began to come filing out of the church, must be thinking of me as they glanced in my direction. I was neither a grown-up nor a child. While my face was unwashed, my hair unbrushed, my clothes tumbled, and my boots unblacked and muddy. To what class of persons were the brethren assigning me? For they stared at me hard enough. Nevertheless, I proceeded in the direction which the young priest had pointed out to me. An old man with bushy grey eyebrows and a black cassock met me on the narrow path to the cells, and asked me what I wanted. For a brief moment I felt inclined to say nothing, and then run back to the drozhki and drive away home. But, for all its beetling brows, the face of the old man inspired confidence, and I merely said that I wished to see the priest, whom I named. "Very well, young sir, I will take you to him," said the old man as he turned round. Clearly, he had guessed my errand at a stroke. "The father is at matins at this moment, but he will soon be back," and, opening a door, the old man led me through a neat hall and corridor, all lined with clean matting, to a cell. "Please to wait here," he added, and then, with a kind, reassuring glance, departed. The little room in which I found myself was of the smallest possible dimensions, but extremely neat and clean. Its furniture only consisted of a small table covered with a cloth and placed between two equally small casement windows, in which stood 2 pots of geraniums, a stand of ikons with a lamp suspended in front of them, a bench, and 2 chairs. In one corner hung a wall clock, with little flowers painted on its dial, and brass weights to its chains, while upon 2 nails driven into a screen, which, fastened to the ceiling with whitewashed pegs, probably concealed the bed, hung a couple of cassocks. The windows looked out upon a whitewashed wall, about 2 arshins distant, and in the space between them there grew a small lilac bush. Not a sound penetrated from without, and in the stillness the measured, friendly stroke of the clock's pendulum seemed to beat quite loudly. The instant that I found myself alone in this calm retreat, all other thoughts and recollections left my head as completely as though they had never been there, and I subsided into an inexpressibly pleasing kind of torpor. The rusty alpaca cassocks with their frayed linings, the worn black leather bindings of the books with their metal clasps, the dull green plants with their carefully watered leaves and soil, and, above all, the abrupt, regular beat of the pendulum, all spoke to me intimately of some new life hitherto unknown to me, a life of unity and prayer, of calm, restful happiness. The months, the years may pass, I thought to myself, but he remains alone, always at peace, always knowing that his conscience is pure before God, that his prayer will be heard by him. For fully half an hour I sat on that chair, trying not to move, not even to breathe loudly, for fear I should mar the harmony of the sounds which were telling me so much, and ever the pendulum continued to beat the same, now a little louder to the right, now a little softer to the left. Chapter 8. The Second Confession. Suddenly The sound of the priest's footsteps roused me from this reverie. "Good morning to you," he said as he smoothed his grey hair with his hand. "What can I do for you?" I besought him to give me his blessing, and then kissed his small, wizened hand with great fervour. After I had explained to him my errand, he said nothing, but moved away towards the ikons and began to read the exhortation. Whereupon I overcame my shame and told him all that was in my heart. Finally, he laid his hands upon my head and pronounced in his even, resonant voice the words, "My son, may the blessing of our Heavenly Father be upon thee, and may he always preserve thee in faithfulness, loving-kindness, and meekness. Amen." I was entirely happy. Tears of joy coursed down my face as I kissed the hem of his cassock and then raised my head again. The face of the priest expressed perfect tranquillity. So keenly did I feel the joy of reconciliation that, fearing in any way to dispel it, I took hasty leave of him, and, without looking to one side of me or the other, in order that my attention might not be distracted, left the grounds and re-entered the rickety, battered drozhki. Yet the joltings of the vehicle and the variety of objects which flitted past my eyes soon dissipated that feeling, and I became filled with nothing but the idea that the priest must have thought me the finest-spirited young man he had ever met, or ever would meet, in the whole of his life. Indeed, I reflected, there could not be many such as myself. Of that I felt sure, and the conviction produced in me the kind of complacency which craves for self-communication to another. I had a great desire to unbosom myself to some one, and as there was no one else to speak to, I addressed myself to the cabman. "Was I very long gone?" I asked him. "No, not very long," he replied. He seemed to have grown more cheerful under the influence of the sunshine. "Yet now it is a good while past my horse's feeding time. You see, I am a night cabman." "Well, I only seemed to myself to be about a minute," I went on. "Do you know what I went there for?" I added, changing my seat to the well of the drozhki so as to be nearer the driver. "What business is it of mine? I drive a fare where he tells me to go," he replied. "Yes, but all the same, what do you think I went there for?" I persisted. "I expect some one you know is going to be buried there, so you went to see about a plot for the grave." "No, no, my friend. Still, do you know what I went there for?" "No, of course I cannot tell, Baron," he repeated. His voice seemed to me so kind that I decided to edify him by relating the cause of my expedition, and even telling him of the feeling which I had experienced. "Shall I tell you?" I said. "Well, you see—" And I told him all, as well as inflicted upon him a description of my fine sentiments. To this day I blush at the recollection. "Well, well," said the cabman, non-committally, and for a long while afterwards he remained silent and motionless, except that at intervals he adjusted the skirt of his coat each time that it was jerked from beneath his leg by the joltings of his huge boot on the drozhki's step. I felt sure that he must be thinking of me even as the priest had done. That is to say, that he must be thinking that no such fine-spirited young man existed in the world as I. Suddenly he shot at me, "I tell you what, Baron, you ought to keep God's affairs to yourself." "What?" I said. "Those affairs of yours. They are God's business," he repeated, mumbling the words with his toothless lips. "No, he has not understood me," I thought to myself, and said no more to him till we reached home. Although it was not my original sense of reconciliation and reverence, but only a sort of complacency at having experienced such a sense, that lasted in me during the drive home, and that, too, despite the distraction of the crowds of people who now thronged the sunlit streets in every direction, I had no sooner reached home than even my spurious complacency was shattered, for I found that I had not the 40 kopecks wherewith to pay the cabman. To the butler, Gabriel, I already owed a small debt, and he refused to lend me any more. Seeing me twice run across the courtyard in quest of the money, the cabman must have divined the reason, for, leaping from his drozhki, he, notwithstanding that he had seemed so kind, began to bawl aloud, with an evident desire to punch my head, that people who do not pay for their cab rides are swindlers. None of my family were yet out of bed, so that, except for the servants, there was no one from whom to borrow the 40 kopecks. At length, on my most sacred word of honour to repay, a word to which, as I could see from his face, he did not altogether trust, Basil so far yielded to his fondness for me and his remembrance of the many services I had done for him, as to pay the cabman. Thus, all my beautiful feelings ended in smoke. When I went upstairs to dress for church and go to communion with the rest, I found that my new clothes had not yet come home, and so I could not wear them. Then I sinned headlong. Donning my other suit, I went to communion in a sad state of mental perturbation, and filled with complete distrust of all my finer impulses. Section 2. Recording by Bill Borst.